In this tutorial, we are going to create a Photoshop generated reflection. A reflection is automatically tells us that the surface that the object is sitting on has a reflective quality. So to create the reflection, it's really a very simple thought process. It's a copy of the image that is manipulated slightly and sitting below the object. So in this case, I have this tube of lipstick and its cap. You will note that the lipstick is in the foreground and the cap is slightly behind it, so it's a little bit in the background, and that creates a little bit of a problem when creating a reflection. However, we're going to go over it so that you can see what's going on. The first thing I'm going to do is, in this image, it's all one layer, so I want to extract the tube of lipstick from its background layer and actually put it on a new document. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool and with contiguous checked and choose the background because it's all white, and then holding down shift I'm going to select this last little bit of shadow that's happening here. So now I need to invert, so I'm going to select invert the selection, and then I'm going to move that to my new document, and then I'll close this, and then I can transform this and move it around freely. I need to make a copy of this that will now become my reflection. So Command J is the keyboard shortcut for duplicate the layer. So now I have a copy on top of another copy. So I'm going to go to the bottom copy, the one that's underneath, and I'm going to transform that and flip it vertically. And this layer will now become my reflection. However, you notice that when we have something in the foreground and something in the background, that we end up with a little gap that happens in the background segment. And a reflection will always happen at the point of contact where the object touches the surface. So this visually does not look right at all because this wouldn't happen naturally. This is fine. This needs to be corrected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually tweak the reflection image and make it so that it actually does sit right under the cap. So to do that, I'm simply going to move that part of the selection. I'm going to use the pen tool and just cut it away, make a selection around the cap, 0% feather, and then I'm going to move that up until it sits right under the cap there. And then I'm going to deselect. Now we have the image set up to create a reflection. It doesn't quite look like a reflection now. Now it looks like it's reflected into a mirror surface. But we're going to create something that looks like it's reflected into a shiny glass or marble, or there's a variety of surfaces that can be reflective. And when something is not in a mirror, but it is on a reflective surface, the reflection is typically a little less opaque. So I am going to reduce the opacity of that layer. And it's also a little bit distorted. So I blur on this, and in this case I'm going to use a Gaussian blur, because a Gaussian blur forms this sort of blur that happens when something is reflected into water or shiny formica or a variety of surfaces. So there we have something like that. I'm going to say okay. The other thing about a reflection is that we don't typically see 100% of the object. If the object is standing off the surface, like the lipstick is, standing up and off the surface, we're not going to see it as clearly here as we see it here. So I'm going to actually just erase some of this. So I'm going to use a large eraser with 0% hardness, and I'm going to just click and pull some of this away, like so. And maybe even a little bit here. There we go. So now I have a reflection and my object, and the only thing I'm missing is the shadow that would form between the two. So I'm going to actually form a new layer, create a new layer between the two layers here. I'm going to use my elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to paint in a little ellipse underneath the back cap, and I'm going to actually feather the selection by, let's try 12 pixels. And then I'm going to fill that selection using black and my fill tool. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity of that and maybe move it around a little bit so it's sitting right under there. I'm going to do the same thing at the front on that same layer, or you can choose to do a new layer if you want to. Sometimes I do a new layer, that way I can reduce the opacity of one more than another. So here I can put a new layer. I'm going to feather that selection by 12, and I'm going to fill it with black. And then I'm going to deselect. And you'll notice that that shadow ended up on top, and I just need to move the layer below, and I'm going to put it into position, and I'm going to reduce the opacity to something that works. And finally, on my top layer right here, sometimes I like to actually turn on the warp tool, and I like to just grab right where the image would make contact to the surface, just pull it down ever so slightly so that it truly is sitting firmly seated on that surface like that. And then move my shadow around like that. So now we have something that actually looks like a pretty realistic reflection, and you could go ahead in the background and put a gradient if you wanted to, which actually defines a light source. Let's say we want the light source to be the upper right, so we're going to gradate from here down, which actually maybe even gradate more so there's not so much black. There we go. And this actually creates a background that looks even better with our reflection. So there we have it, a reflection with a foreground and background, how we have to manipulate it, and what we need to do to create a reflection that is a little bit more realistic.